Coming up on The Daily, Dominic Cummings on how he got rid of Boris Johnson and why he thinks Nigel Farage could be the next Prime Minister.
The first 100 days might be over, but President Trump is showing no signs of slowing down.
America will soon be greater than ever before.
So we're continuing to follow every twist and turn of this remarkable presidency.
And trying to make sense of what it all means for the US and for the rest of the world.
So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Malta Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Sky News Trump 100, wherever you get your podcasts.
Great, okay, so we're all ready. Thank you for agreeing to talk to me. It's been quite a long time of me harassing you over text.
Yeah, sorry about that.
It's all right, it's good to get to this place. Recognise that voice? That's the man who brought us Brexit, Boris Johnson and Barnard Castle. Dominic Cummings was in 2019 probably the second most powerful man in British politics as chief aide to the Prime Minister, until one day he wasn't. For some people, he is the poster boy for everything that's gone wrong in politics. He's the villain, played by Benedict Cumberbatch in that Channel 4 film about Brexit. But to others, he's an insider turned Westminster whistleblower, prepared to lay bare everything that's gone wrong with the system and to try to take it down, even if that means helping Nigel Farage get into number 10. I'm Liz Bates. I've been trying to get this interview with Dominic Cummings ever since he left office because he's such a unique character. I've never come across anyone quite like him in Westminster in 15 years as a reporter. Whether you love him or hate him, and some people really hate him, he's always got a lot to say. And just a warning, he swears a lot. I started by asking him what he thinks about the current state of British politics.
Goodness. Well, Starmer's very similar to Liz Truss, similar to Sunak, similar to Boris after we left. They're not functionally in charge of the government. They're not even functionally in charge of number 10. They're just presiding over a system where it's essentially run by Treasury and Cabinet Office officials. Country's completely enraged. Extremely similar dynamics to the last 15 years. They've also got another fundamental problem that I had, which is they've got a completely comic cabinet. And they've got a dead player dud as a prime minister, a person who has no actual plan. That tells you exactly everything you need to know, right? Apart from the fact that he also has no favourite novel, doesn't dream, etc., 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 right? There's he's dead behind the eyes in lots of important ways.
Can I ask you, because I've heard you talk about this a lot, but other people may never have heard you describe what you think the power dynamic is within government, which is basically that most of what you see in terms of cabinet, prime minister, speeches, people making decisions is a facade and the real power lies somewhere else.
Everything is fake. Fake meritocracy, where almost all the best people are excluded from the system, completely fake responsibility, and you have fake meetings and fake ministers. So the meetings in number 10 are completely scripted. The way that everything works is there's civil servants write literally a script for everyone in advance.
A literal script?
A literal script.
For for a cabinet meeting, for example?
All meetings with ministers are literally scripted, including COVID meetings. What happens is the officials write a script. Prime Minister reads out the introductions, and then everyone reads out their prepared scripted remarks. And then at the end of that, the Prime Minister sums up by reading out what's called chairman's notes, which are the scripted conclusions before the meeting happens.
Okay.
So the conclusions of the meeting are written before the meeting happens. Obviously, no one in any functional organisation that actually works properly would ever have meetings like this. That's how the British state is governed.
But why? I mean, do the people who appear to have power to the public, do they really know that they're not powerful figures? Because they seem to be working hard. They have these staff. They're rushing around Westminster. They seem exhausted. They appear to be making decisions. We're reporting on decisions that they make. Do they sit in the meetings and think, well, I'm a fake minister?
So they're treated by you, the media, as if they're actually in charge. And that's fine by them, because most of these characters aren't actually interested in the job. They're not interested in the real thing anyway. They're just interested in being on the Today programme or going on your TV show. And the officials are happy because they're actually in charge. The actual meeting that decides what happens is the meeting with only officials in, or sometimes with spads like me in number 10. But most of the meetings that happen that are actually important have really no input from ministers. So, I mean, another way of thinking about it is real power. The cabinet secretary has about 100 times more real power than any minister does, barring the prime minister. The cabinet secretary can move people, very importantly. When a bomb goes off, the first person that's told is not the prime minister. The first person that's told is the cabinet secretary. The cabinet secretary then talks to various officials and decides how much of what's happening should be told to the ministers. But the old world that you read about in the history books, the world of people like Palmerston, where they're actually responsible to Parliament, that world is long gone. And the public can sense it, right? The public understand this in a lot of ways better than the MPs and the media do. The voters realise that something's gone profoundly wrong. The voters realise that what they're watching is a fake TV show.
Okay, and that's why this kind of record level of distrust and disengagement.
Correct.
In your view?
Well, not my view, it's just objective truth. Anyone who does market research will tell you that distrust is not even the right way of putting it anymore. When I first started working on this sort of thing 20 odd years ago, you could say distrust and disillusionment and blah, blah. Now it's hate, contempt, disgust.
Well, that's a pretty unusual view of how politics and power works, right? And scary, if it's true. Now, Dominic Cummings has been in those meetings and I haven't, but I should explain what he means by fake ministers and scripted meetings. Cabinet ministers are briefed regularly by the civil service and they often read from those briefings. They would still say, though, that they are really in charge and they really make decisions. Clearly, Dominic Cummings disagrees, and he sees that as the core reason why politics seems to be failing so spectacularly.
A new way of thinking about the gulf between perceptions outside London and perceptions inside Westminster is it's now very common to have discussions outside London with normal people where they talk about coming civil war, about how their area is going to crack up, what they can see around them, and how frightened they are for the future. That's not an abnormal conversation to have now. People are very worried in large parts of the country about the visible breakdown in order.
So crime, broken communities.
Police vanishing from the streets, no-go areas. You have creaking or broken infrastructure in lots of these places where the police station is closed down, can't get an appointment with the GP, need emergency treatment from the NHS, can't get it. So there's a kind of general feeling of all around my local community, each of the critical bits of thing that I rely on in my life, all of these things are breaking. Meanwhile, I haven't had a pay rise in often 15 years. Yeah. A real terms pay rise in 15 years. These dynamics are getting worse and worse. And Westminster is always the last place to realise it. And in my opinion, this gap is getting more and more dangerous. And it's also obviously why you can see people turning to Farage.
And we'll get to Farage in a bit. But first, let's hear from him on the policy issue that's driving a lot of Farage's support and has overshadowed successive governments: immigration.
Starmer has basically is speedrunning the whole Sunak disaster. He's massively raised the salience of an issue that he cannot by definition solve. Now, I went into all this, I had exactly the same conversation with Sunak secretly twice when Sunak became Prime Minister. And I said to Rishi, we all went into this in excruciating detail in 2020. And the conclusion is extremely simple. Stopping the boats is obviously trivially easy in operational terms. The boats could be stopped in days. But the fundamental legal problem is that the Prime Minister cannot give the orders to the Navy in a way that the courts will allow because of the Human Rights Act.
What would the orders be? So the Prime Minister would say to the Navy, what? Turn them back?
Essentially, if your number one priority is stopping the boats, then what you say is, no boats will cross, no people will land. Anybody that we pull off boats will get put on an island somewhere, no one is setting foot in mainland Britain, and no boats are landing here at all. So you lift the people off the boats, they don't come onto the British mainland, and you destroy the boats. You then say, and you announce publicly, special forces are looking for the people who are organising these gangs and the boats. No more are landing, but we're looking for the people who send them. What happens? Absolutely immediately.
And you drop them what?
The
and where?
People organising the boats say, this has turned from an extremely lucrative business into a complete disaster, and I've now got to worry about special forces hunting me down in North Africa. Let's send the people somewhere else. So operationally, how you stop the boat is simple. Also, I would say it's moral, because at the moment you have children dying every month, drowning through this whole nightmare, right? So if you actually made this case to the public would be completely supportive. But you can't do it because of the Human Rights Act. And so he is setting himself up for exactly the same political disaster that Rishi Sunak had. And it's going to play out live on social media in a way that Number 10 can't control, because everyone will see the stupid dinghies arriving every day all through the summer. After Starmer said, this is irredeemable damage and it must stop and I'm going to stop it. Yeah. And it's even more mental for Starmer to do it than for Sunak, because Starmer watched Sunak do exactly this and exploited it himself. And he's doing literally the same thing.
So let's get to Farage and why reform support has suddenly grown. Dominic Cummings gets this better than most people because he understands that anti-establishment anger and how to harness it. He did it during Brexit and then he used it to win Boris his big majority. Now he thinks it's all moving in the direction of reform. Now, he's never really been a big fan of Nigel Farage, and Farage doesn't like him, but he really believes that right now, Farage is the best placed person to smash up the old system.
Both parties have completely destroyed their core reputation. Reform is a vehicle for people to say, we despise you, Westminster. We hate both the old parties, we hate Whitehall, we hate the old media, we hate the whole fucking lot of you. And Farage going up in the polls is the expression of that core feeling, which if anybody goes and does focus groups around the country will tell you that is a ubiquitous sentiment. So Farage is just channeling that. Of course he's going to go up in the polls.
So it sounds like you're quite aligned with that, with reform and kind of what they stand for.
To the extent that if the choices are the Boris Sunak Truss option or the Keir Starmer option, then, I mean, I prefer almost anything to those two things because that path has taken the country into profound crisis, right? It's taken us into the longest period in 200 years of stagnant real wages for normal people. It's taken us into the disintegration of public services. It's taken us into the shit show with police, security, Islamic terrorism, all the other nightmare problems we've got. So at the heart of this whole thing is Westminster is dominated by people who fundamentally think just tweak the old thing but keep going the same direction. And there's not really any alternative. And there is a set of people like me and voters who think that old thing is completely broken and we completely hate it and we're completely sick of it and we want to go in a different direction. Now, the old system can keep struggling and fighting, but it's not going to win that battle in the end. It's only a question of how destructive the transition is.
I guess my question is, you still have so many ideas about politics. You still are thinking about it, talking about it, you know, especially with what's going on in the US. Is reform a possible re-entry kind of vehicle for you?
Not for me, no. I mean,
you don't want to work with Farage? Because I know you've talked to him.
I don't want to work in Westminster.
Okay.
It's just not, I hate it. I've always hated it.
But I was going to say, you've always hated it, but you have worked there before, you know, you have come in. I mean, you hated it back when you were working for Gove. You were calling everyone the blob. And when you were working for Boris, you hated all the Tory MPs on the system and everything. So I guess I wonder, you know, if there might be a possible moment for you to come back.
There are various ways in which I could help a future government, but I'm not, as a political thing, I don't want to be involved with the next election. I don't want to be involved with reform of the Tories. No, it's not what. It's just not how I want to spend my time.
But if there was a kind of insurgent reform government on the horizon, would you be willing to help them campaign?
I think it's far too soon to tell. I think that the whole system is going to go through multiple transitions before we ever get there. And then there's a big fundamental question about Farage and reform, right? At the heart of it, which I think Nigel himself knows, reform has been a one-man band. It's been Nigel and an iPhone. They can win 50, 100, 150 seats with reform as Nigel and an iPhone, but they can't win an overall general election and have a plan for government and have a serious team able to take over Downing Street and govern and control Whitehall with one man and an iPhone. So the fundamental question for reform is, can they actually execute on turning the thing from a one-man band and an iPhone to something which can attract elite talent? Can Farage stand up in 2028 on a platform and say, look at the 10 people on this stage with me. This is going to be my Shadow Chancellor. This is going to be my Home Secretary. Man for man, woman for woman, these 10 people are obviously better, both than the current farce in the cabinet and the current farce in the Tory party. look at me, look at these people. If you imagine that they go through a transition and they can do that, then British politics is going to be in a completely different state.
And what about a pact with the Tories, maybe?
All depends how the cards fall. I mean, Kemi can't do it, obviously, but she'll be gone. But also, it's quite possible that the Tories have just kind of crossed the event horizon and actually aren't salvageable. Like, everyone sort of assumes that because they've always been around, then like somehow there must be at least one last chance for them to turn things around. But it's possible that that chance is actually in their past and doesn't exist.
They might be dead.
Might be dead, yeah.
So I think we've established that he hates Westminster. But what about what's going on in Washington? Dominic Cummings spends a lot of time in the US. So does he see any parallels?
I think at its core, there's some very similar dynamics behind Trump that we've seen here in the last decade and what we've just been talking about. Like, Trump is historically not personally very popular, yet he's still won. He says a lot of things that are very offensive to people, yet he's still won. Why? For very similar reasons to why we won in 2016, why we won in 2019, and why Labour won in 2024. Because he's the person articulating change against the old system. That's at the heart of it. People will even vote for Trump because they're so completely sick. And I think this is a very hard thing for people in Westminster to understand. Westminster sees Trump as an extremist, right? But if you look at the data, in 2016, Trump was seen as an unusually moderate Republican. Moderate. I repeat that. Most people watching this podcast will say, he's bonkers, he doesn't know what he's talking about, he's smoking crack. But go and look at the data. More people thought that Kamala was crazy left than people thought that Trump was crazy right. Now, this is totally counter-narrative to how the mainstream media projects the whole thing. But as often, the media does not project well what the voters are actually thinking. Extremely similar phenomenon you can see in Westminster here, where a whole bunch of Westminster's finest have moved to blue sky, where they've radicalized themselves to the left, but are telling themselves that they're completely in the center and everyone else is fascist and has been fooled by disinformation on social media, right? So overall, I think very, very, very similar dynamics. The voters want change. The mainstream is radicalized to the left and radicalized against change. And the voters say, well, we don't like any of the existing things, but we're prepared to vote for weird things if it means somehow throwing a rock in the pool and forcing Washington/Westminster to change direction.
Okay. And what do you make of the involvement of Elon Musk and Doge? Because we were talking about it earlier, I thought it would be right up your street, but you think there's still some kind of flaws?
I mean, so I think in principle, it's obviously a great thing. But one of the fundamental things that's gone wrong in the West for decades is that elite talent has decreasingly been involved with public service. It's been the case in America, it's been the case in Britain, it's the case across the Western world. So in principle, it's a great thing if elite talent, people that can actually build things and understand modern technology and modern tools and modern organizations, if they're going to go into Washington and grab some of these old bureaucracies that are still running on kind of 1960s, 1970s software and computer systems and say, right, all of this needs an upgrade. I think there's a lot of what Doge has done to expose how money flows, which is great news. I think, though, that they would benefit from, they need some grizzled, cynical dissidents from inside the system. They need some old officials who've worked in the Treasury or the Pentagon and been there for 30 years and understand the ins and outs of how the civil service works. Because it doesn't matter how smart you are. And obviously a lot of those Valley people who are going in, these young technical kids, are incredibly high IQ and incredibly skilled in certain ways.
Misfits and weirdos, right?
Misfits and weirdos. But they just don't know how these organizations work because it's not really written down. So you need people who've been inside places like the Pentagon to say, oh no, like the reason why you can't do blah, blah, blah is because this entity here and these lawyers here actually control and they just won't let any of that happen. So
right idea, but they need some insiders.
They need treacherous dissidents from inside the system.
You could be a treacherous dissident from inside the system.
I am a treacherous dissident.
I know.
I mean, in some ways, that's obviously, I mean, we started doing this ourselves, right, in 2020. That was part of the whole point of creating the data science team.
But that's what I mean. I know you think you kind of started a lot of that here.
Yeah.
So is there not a part of you that would like to go in and finish it?
I mean, I'd like to see it finished. It's not something that I think I should do.
So he has a pretty low opinion of most politicians, but also believes that power and leadership is really important. And of course, he's seen it up close in number 10 alongside Boris Johnson. Their relationship was complicated. Looking back, it seems like it was pretty transactional. Dominic Cummings saw him as a useful idiot, a front man who could distract whilst he did the hard work behind the scenes. To Boris, Dominic Cummings was the man who could get him into number 10, where he'd always wanted to be. No wonder they famously, very publicly, fell out.
I just wanted to ask you as well, we've talked about, your time in number 10, and even though it was quite short, it had obviously a massive impact. I mean, not just in Westminster, but beyond that, you're the person that kind of masterminded the Brexit campaign that got it over the line. You're then the person that won Boris's big majority, installed him. You're then the person that removed him, I think even by your own admission, and kind of brought down that government. That was a very tumultuous period of time in British politics. Lots of aspects of that, you could argue, have eroded trust quite significantly. Do you feel any responsibility for that? Or do you have any regrets about that?
Well, I think two big things. One is that after we won the referendum, the way in which the system then just kind of imploded for 3 years and drove the country into that nightmare constitutional crisis, unprecedented for at least a century, maybe longer, was obviously a terrible thing. It meant that the whole Brexit process became extremely polarised in the country. It undermined Britain's reputation around the world. It made us look what we were, which is a shambles.
And all those people that kind of really believed in Brexit and suddenly kind of had hope in the political system again, I think then on the other side of it felt like, oh, it's just another sham. And it was kind of you that sold them the dream. And I know you feel like the system worked against you to stop you delivering it. But do you kind of feel like, I wish I hadn't done that, and that was...
No, I don't think that at all. I think I'm more happy now that we won the referendum than ever. I think the whole direction of which the EU has gone in has vindicated what we said would happen about the rise of extremist parties in Europe, about the future of the EU and technology and economic stagnation because of things like the EU AI Act and other ways in which Europe is kneecapping itself for the future. So I think in terms of the big arguments that we made, I think we were right. But the big thing has been that people got literally the opposite of what we promised in 2019. And I think one of the reasons why I think the Tory party might just be done is just the stark, extraordinary contrast between what we said we would do in 2019 and then what they did once the Vote Leave team left number 10. That contrast is a massive, massive hole. And I'm not sure the Tories are ever going to climb out of it.
So do you think it was a mistake to try to deliver what you thought you had promised through the Brexit referendum?
No, of course not.
No, via somebody like Boris Johnson?
Well, you can't...
Was hitching your wagon to Boris Johnson a mistake?
But people ask those kind of questions as if there's some magical solution.
There's a choice. There's a choice for you. I
had a choice. Boris came in summer 19 and said, will you come in here? And I could have said no. And if we'd said no and just left the useless old Tory party to deal with it, then everything would have collapsed into an election. There'd have been a second referendum. People say, but why did you rely on Boris? What was I supposed to do? Have a military coup? Install someone else? I mean, it wasn't me that put Boris in as leader of the Tory party or Prime Minister. The MPs did, because the Westminster system is as rotten as it is. It throws up dud characters like him and Liz Truss and Keir Starmer. But the rest of us all are stuck in this nightmare of having to work with these completely dreadful, useless characters. That's why the big question is, can we generate a movement whereby all the wonderful people in this country who are talented and can build things and do know what the hell they're doing, why can't we get them involved with politics? Why can't we get them in as ministers? Why can't we get them into senior jobs in Whitehall? This is possible. If you go back to summer 2020, what did we do in the total crisis there? We put the former commanding officer of 22 SAS and we put him in charge of rapid testing. And then things actually worked. He sent his mates from the SAS around the country and they actually built stuff and bought stuff and drove shit around while all the other useless wankers in Westminster were just sharing PowerPoints.
Just on Boris, I have heard you say, or have you said, that you kind of you brought him down. I mean, you orchestrated his removal from office.
So yeah, me and a few other people said, okay, like as you asked before about questions of responsibility, like we put this guy in there with the 2019 election. We told people we were going to do a whole bunch of things. He's now doing the opposite. Okay, we should get rid of him. And I think that was all to the good. But when an elephant goes rogue, then there's not much else you can do. You have to remove them.
And just finally, how do you see British politics developing over the next few years? And I think we've already discussed this, but what do you think? Do you think you might have any role in it?
I think that it's great news that the realisation that both the old parties are knackered and Whitehall is knackered is spreading far and wide. So it's great that that realisation is spreading. And I think the other thing to be optimistic about is that... So there's one thing to be optimistic about. A bunch of young people are leaving the country, which is bad. But the ones who want to stay are increasingly getting involved and are going to get involved with politics. And the fact that the old system is now so visibly completely broken means that a whole bunch of young, talented people are saying, okay, well, if we're not going to leave the country, we're going to have to get involved and try and change things. And it goes back in a way to what I said about Farage. There's this huge latent energy that he could tap into if he plays his cards right, and he could get a whole bunch of this talent and money could suddenly sweep in, and the old system would just be completely stunned. If he does, that's one path that the future could take.
You see a scenario where Farage could be Prime Minister?
Oh yeah, could definitely happen now, yeah. Because the old system is just so completely broken. The forces now in play are going to express themselves one way or another. The system's going to get much worse before it gets better. Chaos is coming in all sorts of ways. Old parties are knackered. It's going to be another crisis. But how that all works itself out, it could work itself out in different ways.
Okay. Well, Dominic Cummings, thank you very much for speaking to me, finally.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
We covered a lot there, and I hope you enjoyed it. But there's even more if you want to hear it and watch it on YouTube. I'm Liz Bates, and that was a special edition of the Sky News Daily. Thank you for listening.
The first 100 days might be over, but President Trump is showing no signs of slowing down.
America will soon be greater than ever before.
So we're continuing to follow every twist and turn of this remarkable presidency.
And trying to make sense of what it all means for the US and for the rest of the world.
So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Malika Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Sky News Trump 100, wherever you get your podcasts.